Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing fine and that you're ready for one more workshop week of the international training program about symbocity. Today, I will share this lecture as a film. It's about the spatial dimension. And the presentation will also be on Google Drive. So if there's something you find difficult to understand, you can just look at this movie clip a second time, or you can look through the presentation calmly and slowly. So let's get started. The spatial dimension in the conceptual model of symbocity, it's a dimension in its own right. It's a factor that you can look at separately. It's about the shape of the built city. But it's also a way of understanding and representing the other dimensions. And this is what I will speak about today. If we start just to look at two cities, Atlanta and Barcelona. Atlanta in the United States and Barcelona in Spain. Their spatial organization is very, very different. And you can see that this spatial organization also has a great impact on climate change. So Atlanta has 5 million inhabitants, but it's covering a surface of 8,000 square kilometers, which also makes it difficult to walk, go by bike, and use public transport in an efficient way. So their effect on the climate change is 7 tons of carbon dioxide per person and year. But Barcelona, which has also 5 million inhabitants, uses a much, much smaller surface, and it's easier to transport themselves in an efficient way, and their impact on the climate is much, much smaller. So it's less than a ton of carbon dioxide per person and year. And still the quality of life in Barcelona is very high, and people have opportunities in the cities. It doesn't mean that they just live in a very dense city without qualities or opportunities. Looking at density, this is my city, Stockholm. I am right now at home in the center of the island where you see the yellow star, that is where I am. And this map is a quite advanced map made with GIS technology, so Geographical Information Systems, GIS. And this shows the density of the built structure within 500 square meters from every point in the city. So as you see where I am, it's red. It means that this is one of the densest areas of Stockholm. This means that I have a lot of services within walking distance. If I want to go to restaurants, I have 15 or 20 just 5 minutes away. If I want to go to the supermarket, I can choose between 4 or 5 different supermarkets, also just a short walk away. It is easy to cover this kind of structure with public transport. So I have the metro station also very close. But at the same time, I actually have a very good access to parks. So this is what you see marked in white. It's the open spaces, the parks. So it doesn't mean that there is this conflict between high density, a good access to services, and access to parks. That map wasn't quite advanced production behind it, but there are simpler ways of mapping density. This is an exercise we did with the Apartado team in Colombia. It shows the building heights of all the buildings in the city center. The working group, maybe you recognize this from the last week, they wanted to increase the safety in the center. They made this security neighborhood survey. And they realized that with more housing in the center, there would be people at all times of the day and night. And looking just at all the yellow spots here, it's buildings that are low. So maybe it's not very expensive to take away that building. and put a more dense structure instead of it. So this is a very simple mapping. The group would just go out on the street and take notes about the building heights, and then they would make this map on their own in the office. And you see that it's a very simple way of creating a common understanding and communication of this potential, because a lot of the buildings are marked in yellow. That means that they have a low density. This map is from a project I was working on in Stockholm, showing the land use and the mix of functions. So if you look at the map, you can see that yellow represents housing in this case. Orange represents the schools and the kindergartens. In purple, you find retail, restaurants and service. In brown, it's the offices. And blue, you find events, culture, and sports. So with a mix of function within a short distance, it's much easier to minimize transport. It also makes it safer because there are people on the streets during daytime and in the evenings. It means that, for example, an area with only offices during Saturday and Sunday or during the holidays, nobody will be there. So it's a very unsafe area. But also a parking space, for example, it can be used by the people working in the office during the day. And by the night, people living in the area can use that same parking space. So you just build one parking space and two people can use it instead of building a lot of parking areas. So I think that the mix of function is really a potential for synergies. We will now look at some public space mapping examples. You can do mapping of meeting places, of parks and the green infrastructure of a city. You can map the playgrounds for children, but you could also map quality, quantity, and accessibility. I wanted to start with this classic map. Some of you might recognize it. It's about all the accessible spaces in Rome, and it was made in the 18th century. So in 1748, this map of Rome was made by Giambattista Nolli. And it's special because it's not only showing the streets and showing the public spaces, but it's also looking at the interior spaces as part of it. So you can see that the churches are here. You see all the columns and the pillars of the floor plan of the church. But you can also see that the interior courts, so the private houses had open courts. But at that time, the doors were not closed. There were no PIN code or a card or something, but you could just access this. So it was actually a part of a continuous space of streets, marketplaces, churches, and interior courtyards. And maybe this is something you will not do, but I think it's a very nice example to show that we are working in a long tradition of mapping public spaces. This is a different example from Göteborg, the second city of Sweden. And in this case, all the public spaces have gotten a letter to represent the function that is existing in that space. So there's a letter for playground, there's one letter for food market, for basketball grounds, for just a quiet green place where you can sit in the sun or you can read a book. The picnic grounds, so the parks that are suitable for picnic, they have one letter. So this also helps you understand that if you want to create a new public space, you can look at the functions that exist in the area, what is missing, and you can think that maybe now that we are creating a new park, we have to combine a new function so the people living in this area can have many different uses in their public spaces. This is a map showing the access. So that means how far is it to walk to a nice public space. This is something we did with a working group in Mehdia in Tunisia. So the working group made this inventory and mapping of all the public spaces. And with the brown circles, we would show how large parts of the city are accessible within 300 meters. And what was very obvious to the working group is that the city center, which is on the right of the image, on the very close to the sea and to the beaches, there's a lot of public spaces, high quality, and very good access for everybody. But in the western parts of the city, there are areas where there are no public spaces at all. So this helps them prioritize to give equal access to public spaces for all citizens and not being dependent on what part of the city you live in. Another important spatial aspect or spatial dimension is not only the city itself, but the connection to the region. What is the context that your city is located in? I know that some of your cities, one is on a river, two are on close to the sea, and Yogyakarta has many rivers, but it's a little bit distant from the sea. If you look at the regional connections, you will see that there might be important functions for the city that are not located in the city, but in the region. It might be about access and transport. So access to other resources or access to the city itself. The labor market could be regional. At least in Europe, it's very common that you would go by train or by car for 30 or 40 minutes to another city. You might live in one city and work in another one. So there might be a regional labor market that you can actually identify and map. And other kinds of urban-rural linkages that might be just going out to beautiful areas outside the city in the weekend, or agriculture or other kinds of resources that are not in the city. So this is one example of that kind of mapping. It's a city on the Swedish west coast called Kungälv, where the larger dots are representing the primary urban centers. The smaller ones are the secondary urban centers and villages. And the gray lines are showing main transport corridors and corridors or connections that should be developed. So this map is showing the historic and current growth patterns of the city of Umeå. So if you look at what is red is the oldest part of the town, and you can see how this city has grown from the 1600s until today, from the red areas to all the orange areas and the yellow and blue areas. What has a perimeter in red and blue is the current development trend. So the city is now trying not to continue expanding using more and more virgin land, but to see we have to densify the most central and most attractive parts of the city. So this is showing both how the city developed physically during history, but also what is happening right now. Which is also something that we would like you to map during the workshop, what is happening right now. The social factors, so the social dimension, I find this very interesting. Sometimes the socioeconomic differences in the city are very obvious. You just look at the city and you will see it. Just like the picture here, there is really a wall dividing the rich from the poor in a very obvious way. And there are no connecting streets, for example. You can see that the street network is completely segregated on the right side of this picture. But sometimes this issue is hidden. If you look at statistics or if you just walk around in the city, you will not see this, these differences or these inequalities very easily. But mapping can then help you to discover this kind of question. So I will show you now two maps from a mapping project that was made in Stockholm. And the book down there in green, it's called Stockholm of Differences. And this map shows how many young people could not access secondary school because their results from primary school were not good enough. And what you can see that in the purple areas, all young children were accessing secondary school. So all the school results were good enough. But in the dark blue areas, between 20 and 40%. So that means that 1 out of 5 or even 2 out of 5 did not access secondary school because the school results were too poor. And this is a social difference that was made so obvious thanks to this, this mapping. Another map from the same mapping project is about income equality. So if you would just look at the average of Stockholm, you would say that, well, the average income in Stockholm is 400,000 Swedish krona. This doesn't say anything to you, but it's a number in itself. But if you start looking at the differences within Stockholm, you will see that in some neighborhoods, the one with the lowest income, it was only about 230,000 krona. And in the richest neighborhood, the average was more than 1 million. So it means that the difference is more than 4 times just looking at the average. And then, of course, there are some people that are even richer than that and some people that are poorer than that. But thanks to this mapping, you can also see how these differences are. Sometimes there's a very, very long distance between the richer and the poorer neighborhoods. And sometimes it's actually just a few hundred meters away. This is Stockholm again, and this is a project that I'm working on right now. And this is trying to understand the access to employment. So every dot on this map is a housing unit. It's actually an address where somebody is living. And we used statistics about where the offices, where the shops, where all the job opportunities are located to make this map. So it's once again a quite advanced GIS analysis. And it shows that if you walk for 1 kilometer, how many jobs opportunities are there around there. It doesn't mean that these positions are vacant. It just means that it's a job that maybe will be vacant or that there are offices and job opportunities in your neighborhood. So the difference is from the red area where you might find as much as 13,000 job opportunities. And if you look at the dark blue area, it's actually less than 200. So and this is not so strange because many of the offices, they are in the center. Most cities have a CBD, a central business district, where offices are located. But now that we are trying to find strategies to relocate offices in the other areas, it's important for us to understand how the access will be for different parts of the city. So if we overlay this with these black circles, and the black circles is a little bit like the last map, showing the 6 neighborhoods with the lowest average income of Stockholm. So if we combine income and where the jobs are located, it can help us to identify different strategies for different locations. In some cases, you can see in the north, for example, it's pretty close to a cluster of offices. So maybe it's more about public transport and seeing how people in the neighboring areas can access those jobs. And in other parts of the city where the jobs are very far away, it's about finding another strategy. But this is, I find, an interesting way of combining 2 data sets in one map to understand and see patterns that you would not see if you just look at the statistics as an Excel sheet or a spreadsheet of data. So once again, I'm showing some quite complicated maps, but most things you can also do it much simpler to have a similar effect. This is what I showed you the other week. Security is also a social issue. A quite simple mapping of the security survey that we did as a workshop in the main park of Apartado. I see that the text in this PowerPoint is wrong, so you should not look at that. But the blue shows the safe streets, and the red shows the streets where people are saying that it's insecure. And I think this information, the spatial information, is important because you could say, the city center is so unsafe, thinking that all of the city center is unsafe. But the spatial differentiation of saying that, no, it's the street next to the river, it's the street next to the bridge. I know that they are selling drugs there, for example. That is the unsafe part. But the main shopping streets, the blue streets, they are actually safe. So the whole area is not unsafe, and you can make a differentiation through a spatial analysis. So to summarize, why is mapping an efficient tool? Well, it makes you discover patterns that you didn't know existed. I think it can uncover a spatial differentiation of an issue, just like I was saying in Apartado and the unsecurity. Maybe you just think of everything as equal, and when you start mapping, you say, no, but actually there is a difference between one part of the city and the other one. It helps to create a common understanding of the city. When you do this exercise together, you will speak about the city and see that you can see the city through the eyes of your colleagues and understand it together. But it's also usually a convincing way to communicate an analysis. So once you have the map, it's also a good way to communicate what you want to see to those who are in the steering group in your city, for example. But I think it's also easier to understand, to remember, and to convince if you use verbal and visual communication at the same time. So it's also a way to communicate and to remember in a better way, I think. So I will soon stop speaking. I hope that you're ready for a workshop that you will do on the second day of this week in the morning. There should be maps prepared for you and the workshop kit. So there should be large plotted maps. There should be sketching paper. So this transparent paper that you can just start drawing and writing on. There should be tape, so you can put this on the map, so it's not moving around, because if it's moving around, it will be difficult, and you will see that one marking will be in the wrong place. There should be pens in different colors, particularly for the land use exercise. Post-its, so you can write things and you can move around post-its. And remember that sketch paper is for sketching. Don't be afraid. Don't sit for 10 minutes looking at this. Start big. Start drawing. You can take a new sketch paper if it's ugly or if you make mistakes. Discuss and show what you think. Start fast. And then in the end, you can just make a final version that looks very nice with the perfect information if you want that. And please take a photo of every map and insert this in the Google presentation that we will make for you, that is also in Google Drive. So the expected workshop results is that you would work on 4 separate maps. So not everything in one map, but you would do first one, then the second, then a third map. Starting with land use patterns as number 1. As number 2, a spatial SWOT. As number 3, you would look at the social dimension of your city. As number 4, looking at the specific challenge. So the change project or the challenge that you have identified, and see if you can make a thematic mapping for that issue. And if you find it very, very interesting to work on one map and you see that the time is running out and you cannot make all 4 maps, don't worry. Do just 1, 2, and 3. Don't do number 4. Don't feel stressed. Feel that if you are in a good working mode, you just continue with what you were doing. So this is the first map then. So it's land use patterns, doing color coding for housing, workplaces, shopping areas, municipal services. That could be schools, for example, or medical services. Parks and recreation areas, water, the sea, the rivers, and the main transportation routes or the main avenues of your city. And if you look at this example here, it's very detailed, one color for every block. Maybe this is not possible. Maybe it's more like looking at bigger areas to understand your city. Number 2 is then the spatial SWOT. So you would take the SWOT matrix that you already made for your city, and you would take the most important aspects and see if you can put them on a map. So you would identify the three most important key assets or the strengths, the S of the SWOT, and opportunities, but you would also identify three challenges, so weaknesses and threats, and see if you can put these three onto your city map. Maybe if pollution is one of your big weaknesses, then maybe you should put what are the most polluted areas? What are the big avenues where you cannot breathe because the air is so bad? Or do you have land close to industrial estates that were polluted, for example, from the industries, and you could not do agriculture there, or it's not healthy to be in those areas? Maybe flooding is an issue. You can map what areas are often flooded or in a risk of being flooded. You should also put I think the nicest areas. So put some hearts maybe to show where do you like. On the weekend, what parts of the city would you go to meet your friends or to go out with your family? What would you say are like the most beautiful parts of your city? And on this map as well, identify the urban growth patterns of today. So you don't have to make a big historical coloring, but just maybe with some arrows showing in what direction is the city growing now. And if this is planned, is this according to your comprehensive plan, or is this something that is happening as an independent and wild development? Number three is the social dimension. So it's about incomes. If you know this more or less, maybe you don't have the data, but it's not so important. What are the low income areas? What are the average income areas? And what are the high income areas of your city? Do you have informal settlements or slums that you could mark in the map? Do all areas, for example, have equal access to schools and healthcare? Or are there areas where there are no schools and it's actually difficult for the children to get to school because of this lack? Are there physical barriers that are dividing the city, so it's difficult to walk from one part of the city to another? Are there some unsafe areas that you know about that are very much considered the unsafe areas of your city? So maybe you don't have the information about all these social issues. So you have to discuss in the group what are important social issues in your city, what do you have knowledge about, and how can you start to map this so it starts to give this understanding of the spatial dimension of the social or socioeconomic questions of your city. And this is the last one, and this one might be a little bit difficult. So it's a little bit of an experiment with you, and it's to look at your challenge. So try and do a mapping of your individual theme. I know that one is about waste management. So maybe it's about looking at where the important infrastructure for waste management is. Where do you have big problems with waste? In the slum case, maybe it's mapping where all the slum areas are. Or maybe you would decide to do one of them and make a spatial SWOT, again, like the number 2 exercise, and do this for only one slum area. For flooding, it's maybe mapping what areas usually have problems with flooding, and maybe see where the source of the problem is. Is that the water is coming on the streets? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from the rain, from higher areas going down to this area? So is it coming from the river, or what is the problem in this case? And for Concern Island, we made a special map. So maybe it's identifying the local land use. So maybe it's doing like the land use map again, detailed on Concern Island, or it's maybe a local spatial SWOT. You decide this. We will be sleeping when you're doing this exercise. So you discuss and you see what you find interesting to try on this 4th analysis, if you have time for this. I think it's good if you have time because you have 4 hours, but I understand that sometimes you get so enthusiastic about the work. So it's easy to get stuck in that. So I just want to tell you good luck, have fun, discuss a lot, use all the colors, the pens, the tapes, the post-its, and I hope it will be an interesting exercise for you. See you later.